14th of August, 20th Sunday in Ordinary Time. Sermon on Hebrews chapter 11, verses 29 to chapter 12, verse 3. The letter to the Hebrews was written to a church that was losing its confidence. It was a time when persecution of Christians was growing, and many in this congregation had already suffered confiscation of property or imprisonment. They were on the edge of giving up and returning to what they saw as the safer ground of Judaism, which still had legal status under Roman law. This entire letter is a plea to the church to keep its faith. The writer reminds them of the surpassing value of Christianity compared to Judaism. They had a better priesthood in Jesus, a better and permanent sacrifice for sin compared to the constant need for animal offerings that had to be made under the Jewish system, a better covenant and a better sanctuary, heaven itself. Now, in chapter 11, the writer is reminding his readers of all the faithful people who've gone before them. No doubt, when they read this catalogue of faithfulness, the people were greatly encouraged and strengthened in their determination to keep their faith. And these words are preserved for us too, because we all know what it is like to be discouraged and fearful. So we're going to unpack this passage to find the encouragement and strength to continue to hold fast to what we believe. First, we have three notable examples of situations in which God acted on behalf of faithful people and brought them to safety. We have Moses and the Israelites passing safely through the waters of the Red Sea when they were pursued by the Egyptians. They had just started on their journey to the Promised Land and were horrified to see horsemen catching up on them and apparently trapping them on the shore of the sea. But God divided the water so that they could cross, then brought the waters down on the pursuing Egyptians. On reaching the border of the Promised Land, the Israelites had to take the strategic city of Jericho. They were told to march around the city once each day, and on the seventh day the walls fell and they could capture the city. Earlier, though, Israelite spies had entered the city and had been helped by a prostitute, Rahab. As a result, she was kept safe through the siege and the defeat of the city, and she became an ancestress of Jesus Christ. The writer of this letter then lists many more, including Gideon, who defeated the Midianite host with only a tiny army, David, the shepherd boy who became king, and many of the prophets. Through them, we're told, kingdoms were conquered, justice administered, lions' mouths were shut. That must refer to Daniel. Fire was quenched. That's Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego, who refused to bow down to King Nebuchadnezzar's golden image. We're told that weakness was turned to strength and the dead were raised. And so here we have proof that trust in God can mean that all turns out well. Not always, though. Some faithful people had to endure suffering and maintain their faith, even in the face of death. And so the writer lists those who were tortured, jeered at, flogged, chained, imprisoned, stoned, sawn in two. This last refers to the prophet Isaiah, who died in this way. There was no easy way out for these servants of God. They were destitute, persecuted, ill-treated, and we're told the world was not worthy of them. But, although none of them received their reward then, or saw even a glimpse of the future kingdom, God's plan nevertheless included them. Together with all the rest of God's people, they will be made perfect. And so we're told that God can act on our behalf and bring deliverance out of danger, healing out of sickness, and restoration of what is lost. But sometimes we are called to endure and to maintain our faith, even in the face of illness, economic struggles, even tragedy. That fits very well with what we have all experienced, and it's true that faith can grow stronger through suffering. I'm always impressed with Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego's riposte to King Nebuchadnezzar when they were threatened with a burning fiery furnace. We do not need to defend ourselves. The God we serve is able to save us from the furnace, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. That's a wonderful attitude to have when we have to face difficulties. The world we live in has suddenly become a much more uncertain place, even than it was 5 or 10 years ago. With the rapid escalation of the climate crisis, the pandemic, and now this crippling war in Ukraine that threatens world peace together with fuel and grain supplies, our faith has been tested like never before. We're coming across real poverty, those who are unable to heat their homes or even to cook a meal, concerns about future flooding, unstable weather systems bringing violent storms and loss of power. It seems that our work and responsibilities as Christians and our personal anxieties are never ending. And so we need this encouragement from the writer of Hebrews. Let's read on. He tells us we are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. The Greek word used here for witnesses is marturion. It's where we get the word martyr. It was because Christian witnesses were so willing to die for their faith that the word took on that new meaning. And so to have faith like that, we're told to throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. What might that be? The writer uses the analogy of running in a race. An athlete would divest himself of anything that might weigh him down or trip him up. So we must get rid of the excess weight in the form of worldly concerns with wealth and status, and avoid the trailing shoelaces of sinful habits, ill temper, and lack of compassion. Then we can run with endurance. I remember coming across that verse in Sunday school when I was a very little girl. May we run with patience the race that is set before us. I learnt it off by heart. The words impressed me. But at that time I had no idea about the things that life would throw at me. I do now though, and I'm glad that I'm still in the running. We must fix our eyes on Jesus, who endured shame and death for the joy set before him. The joy set before us makes all the difference between those who fall into despair and those who endure. So let us consider the final words of this passage. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinful men, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. The last thing we must do in these difficult days is to grow weary and lose heart. Then we would be of no use to anyone, and we would lose our joy. This sermon is not intended to be a guilt trip. We will all go through periods of feeling that we are worn out in our faith and weighed down by problems. But may we encourage one another to battle on and remember the words of this passage. The writer wanted his readers to succeed in their faith. His is a bracing letter, a bit lacking in empathy at times. He even rather heartlessly reminds his readers that they haven't shed any blood yet. I hope none of us will be that callous, but we can certainly emulate much of the counsel in the letter to the Hebrews and help one another to stay in the race.